Hello, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying all the amazing talks at FOSDEM so far. And thank you for joining the session called Mission Threading for All. I'd like to talk to you about what I have been up to in the past few months. So most of you will be familiar with this application. It is a screenshot of Element Web where you can communicate securely over the Matrix protocol. And something that you might have wished for and that we wanted to build for a very long time is the ability to have threaded conversation. It is something that has become a bit more ubiquitous in the chat application landscape, and we think that it's a great addition to Element and Matrix overall. And this is not just me saying that. We have this issue dating all the way back to 2016 that has more than 300 comments on it, and that has been seeing activity from 120 different participants. So needless to say that this is a very anticipated and requested feature. So I'm glad that we actually have a solution today for this problem. So I'm Germain. By day, I'm an engineer working at Element, specifically on the web platform, and also contributing to Matrix. And by night, I volunteer with CodeBar, which is a charity who wants to build a more diverse tech community. And we're doing that by running free regular programming workshops for people that are underrepresented in the industry. So if you're interested and want to give a bit of your time to help others doing that, you should consider joining one of our virtual events. And today we'll go over three main topics: how to bring threads to Element, what are the goals of that project, and how can we make it a success. Then we have to look at what Matrix is capable of today, and whether we can build a viable thread experience using what's in the protocol as we speak. And then we have to specify how threads work for everyone to be able to replicate this and build that in their own clients or bridges or any other system that uses Matrix. So I have not been working by myself on this. There's been an amazing team working with me, with someone working on the Synapse side of things, someone contributing to Android, to iOS, and we've had a lot of input from product managers and designers to help us build something that is coherent and will be useful to everyone. So the first thing is are those project goals. We've identified three main ones, and there's probably more things that could be done, but we think that launching threads with this can be really useful. So the three goals are to declutter the main feeds, to keep topics together, and to make catching up easier. Some of you might have been in the Matrix HQ room, and it can be sometimes a bit difficult to follow conversations that are happening in parallel. You will have messages going back and forth, and you don't necessarily know whether the last message is related to the one before that, or whether that's part of another conversation. Threads will help you to essentially take some of this conversation away from the main timeline and put them in their own little container to prevent this kind of cross communications in high traffic rooms. And in here, we're really focusing threads on the instant messaging use case. There's more things that can be done. A good example of that would be Cerulean, which essentially creates an experience that is a bit more Twitter-like. And this is something that would be possible in the future, but not involved in this initial discovery and feature building that we've done. But if you want to try it for yourself, it's available today in develop.element.io, where we have all of the upcoming features that are deployed. So if you go there, you can go in your user settings. You'll have a little tab called Labs on the left. And in there, you'll find threaded messaging. So if you toggle that on, you'll be able to use threads today. So let's have a look at how threads work in Element. So you have screenshots of the three platforms, the web on the left, iOS in the middle, and Android on the right-hand side. And you have this message action bar that lets you create a thread. Once you click on it, on the web, you will have a sidebar that opens on the right-hand side, and on mobile, you will have a new view that pops in. And in there, you'll see a timeline of all of the threaded messages in that conversation. And you can expect to have all of the events that you can send in a normal room can also be sent in threads. So whether you want to reply some text or whether you want to send an image or a file, all of that will be available to you in a thread. But to help with catching up, we've created as well this thread list where on the top right, you will find a thread icon, and upon clicking it, you will have a list of threads where you can have an overview of every thread that has been created in that room. And you can filter the threads on whether you have created them or whether you want to see all the threads available. There's more filters that we could build in the future. At the moment, we have those two. So now that we've seen how threads look and behave within Element, let's see what is available in the Matrix protocol that would help us bring that experience to life. There's two main ways that we've identified looking at the existing protocol, and there's probably more, but they were less suited to the goals that we wanted to aim for. So the first one, and probably the most obvious one, would be to use the reply chain, or using the reply functionality to create a thread. So we could add like a little flag within the event replies to say, hey, this is actually not a reply, but this is threaded messages. And you would have an event that references another event, that references another event, that references another event, which subsequently creates the threads. And this works pretty well for like small threads. But as soon as you have a very long chain of events, the pagination becomes quite hard. You're putting more strain on the client to go and fetch all of those events. You also have more difficulty handling read receipts. At the moment, the read receipts assume a chronological ordering for all events in a room, and building off the reply chain kind of like breaks that assumption because messages are not necessarily in that chronological order anymore. And this would have to be changed for them to work properly. But one of the bigger problems is losing the ability to reply within a thread. If we're using that reply functionality to create a thread, we can't also use it to notify of a reply. So this was probably one of the biggest restriction, and a lot of people have expressed that this feature would be very useful to keep because it helps express something different. The other approach that we've identified is to create one room per thread. And this sounds like a great idea because it brings a lot of features out of the box. So we have all of the timeline mechanism that already exists. all of the pagination system that works out of the box. All of the read receipts are there. But in terms of backwards compatibility, all the clients would essentially completely miss out on thread conversation. And that would be a problem because not everyone is developing at the same pace. Not everyone wants to focus on this and thinks that this is a valuable thing for their client. Another problem that we've potentially that we've identified would be the room proliferation. This would create a lot more room and could cause essentially performance issues. These are not unsolvable. They are things that are done to speed up, like the room joins. There are things that are done to speed the sync. But when we would launch thread, it could become problematic. And the synchronization of the membership state across all those rooms would be also very difficult to manage. Imagine if you were to leave a room, you would have to then leave all the threads room that were associated with that room you just left. So it seems like it's bringing a lot of like very good things out of the box, but it's also creating more challenges, which we have decided to not do this way. But we've identified another way of doing that, and I'd like to talk to you about how we have specified threads and how it looks like at the moment. So the MSC 2674 defined a new way of adding a relationship. And you can now add m.relates to with rel type and have an event ID that will be targeted. So whenever you want to create a thread, you need to decorate your event with a little snippet of code that is on the screen. We say m.relates to rel type of m.thread, an event ID that targets the root message of that thread. And you'll notice right below that we have m.inReply2 event ID that targets the last event. And this is very important for backwards compatibility. As I mentioned before in the threads as room slides, we want people using clients that do not support threads to have a coherent experience, for them to be able to read a conversation even if they don't have that feature available. And this is why we have built that thread fallback using the rich replies. But we've also decided to add a new flag to that m.inReply2 to say to clients, hey, this is actually a genuine reply that you should render in your client, and this is not just a fallback. And you do that by adding m.renderIn m.threads. It's deliberately been created that way so that you can have different rendering targets added over time, so that in the future you could potentially broadcast a threaded message onto the main room. And because not everyone will have threads at the same time, we also think that all clients should add rel type m.thread when a user that is using a client that does not support thread but replies to a message that is part of a thread, so that other clients that do support thread will be able to include that message in the thread and create a coherent experience for the users that are using threads. So this is kind of like a both way compatibility experience that we think works quite well. And after MSC 2674, there's also another one that landed recently in this matrix specification called MSC 2675 that defines server-side aggregated relations. And in the unsigned field of an event, you have this new m.relation object, and in there you have a list of relations associated with that event. So in here we receive m.threads, which contains some events that are some things that are specific to that threaded event. We have a reference to the latest event sent within that thread, a count of the replies that have been sent to that thread, and whether the currently logged in user has participated to that thread or not. And these were the main things that we needed to build the experience that we think was the most useful to users. But if you can think of any other stuff to add, we can still iterate on that and include new things in the protocol. And there is also like a new way to filter messages in the timeline. And this filter lets you send the sender of the relation. So you can say, hey, I want to have all of the messages that are of type m.threads that have been sent by Alice. And in that way, you get like a filtered down list of events that are just matching this. So you can have all your thread or all of the thread within a room. And with all of this, we have essentially brought to you MSC 3440 that will hopefully land shortly in the matrix specification. So if you're curious and want to understand a bit more in depth how this works, you can go and then read through it. We also go a bit more in depth about some of the alternatives and other experiments that have been done in the past in the matrix ecosystem. And now on to what the future might hold for threads. So I mentioned earlier in this talk that read receipts had some of their assumptions broken when using the reply chain, and this is also true with the solution that we went with. Because read receipts assume a single chronological timeline, and thread is essentially supporting multiple timeline and does not necessarily respect that ordering anymore. And for that reason, we might want to rework this for better cross-platform compatibility and synchronization. We also want to bring some new actions to be able to subscribe or follow threads. Notification management means that some people will probably not want to be notified for every threaded messages that arrives in the room, but they might only want to receive messages for thread that they've expressed interest in, and you can express interest by following it or by replying to that thread. So this is not currently implemented, but is something that we're strongly considering. And to help with that as well, we could be broadcasting messages to the main timeline. If you have a conversation with a subset of users in a thread and that conversation reaches an end, you might want to essentially broadcast the conclusion of that conversation into the main timeline so that everyone is aware without having to catch up on the entire thread. And some of you might be wondering, but what about subthreads? Is that a thing? And with threads and the approach that we're taking for the instant messaging use case, this was not really something that we had to consider, and that it felt like it was going to create more complexity for this use case. But this is why we have the MSC process. If you think that this feature is going to be helpful, then we can always iterate on this and create a new experience for subthreads. Well, this is about all I have today. So thank you very much for listening to this talk. You can find me on Matrix at germaingermainmatrix.org. And let me know if you have any questions. I'll be here for the next 10 minutes answering all of them.
Les notifications, c'est vraiment la seule chose où on est sûr qu'on va travailler dessus parce qu'on sait qu'il faut faire quelque chose, quoi.
Ok, potentiellement il y a un peu de lag, donc on sera peut-être live en avance. So we might be live in advance. So like the previous talk, I'm going to do a short dance just for your entertainment, just in case there is a bit of lag. In German, it's completely still, so I'm the only person dancing in the meantime. Before we are live. Oh yes, we are 2% dancing now.
I can do it.
And we are supposed to be live in 1 second. And here we are. So the first question by a totally independent person is, Matrix, did it really need threads?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of, we've heard a lot of people that are using other chat clients like that have threads that would not consider Matrix as an alternative just because there wasn't threads. A lot of people organize their conversation that way. It's really more ubiquitous in the instant messaging space. And really, it's just another way to communicate. A lot of people love replies. They're not going anywhere. We're just adding another way for you to organize your conversation and your content in different rooms. So I think it was just really important to build that to make sure that we answer the need for those people.
All right, but some people may not like threads as they are right now, because it's possible to test threads right now on develop.element.io and Element Nightly for people who are living on the bleeding edge of technology. So as they are right now, I personally like them. I think they are an improvement, but some people really don't like threads for very valid reasons. They are very imperfect. Are they considered to be done, or do you want to improve them in the future?
I mean, for sure, nothing is set in stone, right? In here, this is a first version. We're launching an MVP. It's an MVP that is very geared towards instant messaging. There's many more things that we can work on, right? And I might spoil the answer to the next question, but we're also considering bringing like a setting to disable threads because some bridges are not supporting threads, and we don't want to create like noise for those users. Some people just really don't like that way of communicating, and they just want to have everything in the main timeline, and that's fine, right? But I personally don't think that we need to have that setting to launch threads as a first experience. If you don't like it, you don't have to use it, and in the future we'll bring more configuration potentially.
Well, I think so. The kind of bridging you have in mind with the toggle to disable threads obviously is IRC, because it can be very noisy with IRC. I know there were some discussions on fallbacks. Can we use it as answers, as responses, etc., replies? Maybe it could be too noisy for some rooms. It really depends on the culture. But some other bridges could see it as very welcome additions. I'm thinking of Discord, for example, or Slack, which is quite threads heavy most of the time. Is it something that is going to be bridged? Is it on the roadmap?
At the moment, for this initial release of threads, that's not something that is planned. But the people that are supporting those bridges will look into that. I know that they already spend a bit of time looking into the experience that's going to be provided for IRC users. And I know they're looking to do more things for Discord and Slack in particular, but I don't really know like the timings of this kind of stuff. But watch that space; it should come.
All right, and we have a question from Nico who tells us, how will I be able to control notifications for threads? Can I have per thread unread counts, and mute, unmute threads, or even make them noisy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. I touched on that a bit during the talk. Notifications are imperfect at the moment. the read receipts and read marker situation assumes like one chronological timeline, and we kind of like breaking that with threads. And one of the first thing that we're going to do as a follow-up to the initial release is to kind of like work on notifications and bringing those workflows to the next level. Whether you want to follow a thread, whether you want to stop the notifications from a specific thread, having that unread count per thread is definitely going to be built because I believe that will improve the experience by a lot. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And we also want to hear the feedback from the community and how this works and what we can do to improve that, how people are actually using it in the wild, and what will be the best balance between not missing a single message and then being too noisy. It's a very hard balance to strike. It looks like Slack is very polarizing in that regards. So we just want to make sure that we're going to do things right.
Yeah, and you mentioned that on the MSC you have considered alternatives. Can you expand a bit on which alternatives and why you did not pick them?
Yes. So the two main alternatives that we considered was something just based on the reply chain, and the other one was threads as room. There were like other experiments that were done before, but they were not necessarily geared towards instant messaging as much as what we're doing at the moment. So I'm not going to go into too much details about that. But with threads as rooms, it brings a lot of good things, but it also means that you have to have room upgrades, and it because you need to bring so much more like new capability. How do you deal with restricted history? Can you have restricted pickability on those kind of rooms? And those were like very complex problems to solve, and that would have kind of like probably taken a bit longer than what we're doing with relations at the moment. And the reply chain was taking us pretty far, but didn't solve all of the problems that we can solve with that new relation at the moment.
All right, and you mentioned in your talks that there are some things coming because threads are not considered done forever. So those are things that are not being worked on before threads are launched officially in Element, but those are things that are considered for the future. Do you know how likely it is to get it being worked on? Do you know if there is customers asking for specific features, or how likely some features are going to come, but just not before the go live?
Right. Most likely, once we launch Thread, we're probably going to take like a little step back just to understand how people are using it. Whilst we've developed the feature, we've heard a lot from the community, and a lot of people were like very enthusiastic to dog food that feature and to give us feedback. So a lot of the things that we're talking about in the future was stuff that we talk internally at Element, but also a lot of feedback from the community. So I believe when Threads are launched, we're going to just take a little step back, understand a bit how everything works and how it's actually used, and kind of like decide what the next step is. But the first thing will probably be notifications, because it's one of the core pieces that could use improvements.
All right, and I saw a bit of activity in the dev room about nested threads. Unfortunately, we have 15 seconds to conclude. So this room is going to be open for people who want to follow up with questions. In the meantime, I will find you in the next talk. Bye.
Bye.